Hello everyone, welcome back to Anime Oracles, and today we'll be talking about the latest arc of Railgun. Ever since the panel drop in Railgun's Jailbreaker arc finale, people have been speculating whether this is the backstory concerning Mikoto that Kamachi alluded to way back in OT5 afterward. And a few chapters back, it was basically confirmed. Yes folks, we are finally getting the backstory regarding Mikoto's mysterious roommate and her first year at Tokyo Dai. I know many people have voiced their opinions in the initial chapters that this seems to come out of nowhere, but my take on this is it fits well with the kind of person Mikoto is. If she has some sort of past that has some sort of bad memory attached or some conflict associated with it, which probably will be the case in this one, she's the type to keep things to herself. So it makes sense as to why we didn't get any mention of Mikoto's old friends before, whether it's in the Index novels, Railgun SS novels, or the Railgun manga. If you pay attention to Railgun chapter 66, Clique part 1, where Mikoto, despite not actively bringing up her father in any normal conversation before, suddenly had this forlorn expression on her face when Kongo was talking about her own father, there was a monologue of her wondering where her father could be. This is actually in line with what we know in the Index novels. As surprising as it is, Mikoto actually doesn't know what her father does for a living and where exactly he operates from. It's not very uncommon for kids in boarding schools to be sort of detached from what their parents or loved ones are doing with their lives. There's a saying, out of sight, out of mind, and I honestly don't see any reason why Mikoto, considering how eventful Academy City is, not actively recalling her friends from a year back is all that unnatural. It's only when her primary friend circle started referring to each other on a first name basis that her memory was jogged. So because of her eventful life, she may have simply been too distracted or preoccupied, whatever you want to call it, to actively think of her former friends. And hence, they haven't been mentioned before. So it doesn't come across as too surprising to me at least, although I admit I can understand the perspective of the people who think otherwise. Coming to Mikoto's past, there's a good deal of subtleties as well as blatant visual information to take note of here. Starting off with the fact that the way Mikoto holds her bag in her freshman year is different from all the other times we have seen her with her school bag. It's usually slung over her shoulder, whereas here she carries it exactly like a normal girl should. I think the answer to where exactly Mikoto picked it up from is given in the chapter itself when this other student shows up who holds the bag exactly like future Mikoto does. Who exactly is she? For that, let's delve into the chapter. And sure enough, we see one of the two friends who is shown back in the Jailbreaker arc finale. This girl, who has a design similar to Sailor Moon, is Ruri, and she's a second year at Tokyo Dai. I'm sure as soon as you notice her for the first time, there will be plenty of aha moments. Everything in her appearance screams that she will have a big influence on the current Mikoto. First, there's the back. We also catch a glimpse of her delinquent demeanor due to her dressing style, and since Mikoto is kind of a square peg in a round hole kind of person anyway when it comes to girly aspects, we know they'll be good friends. Next, the famous chaser kick. Misaka Mikoto mentions in OT3 that this is a tradition in Tokyo Dai, and sure enough, that is confirmed by Ruri. It seems they have a habit of roundhouse kicking this particular infamous vending machine, so this is where she picked up her knack for vandalism. We are given a detailed view of the student establishments in Tokyo Dai, that is, the cliques. We know in the future Shokuho Misaki is going to rise to prominence and build the school's biggest clique. In fact, we also get information that the head of the largest clique at Tokyo Dai gets a royalty title, which explains why Shokuho is referred to as the queen. Concerning the canon timeline, there is some important information here. Shortly after GT1, after Mikoto faces off against Nyoka and Maidono, certain fans were wondering if she actually was the weakest level 5. Since unlike say Accelerator or Kakine, she doesn't have an ability that is as unique or as versatile or overwhelming in power. In fact, even if you consider Mugino, she is confirmed to have more output than Mikoto. Gunha's power is unknown, but he has shown a fearsome amount of capability and is even able to parry lightning shots made by Misaka level 6 shift form. Shokuho might be the exception to this, although I'd argue Mikoto has never shown to be able to exceed her limits drastically under a heavy amount of stress and emotional turmoil like Shokuho did in New Testament 22 Reverse. And we also know from Astral Body that Shokuho intentionally manipulated her results so that Tokyo Dai could claim they produced a level 5. One could say that maybe Mikoto did go well beyond her perceived capabilities in Sister's arc when she faced off against Accelerator, and it just wasn't noticeable because it wouldn't have done anything against Accelerator anyway. But if that were the case, she has been shown to be under the same, if not more, amount of mental distress in New Testament, and there just hasn't been any noticeable changes in terms of power levels. The current chapter stating that she is the weakest level 5 actually seems to support that. This is further strengthened by the fact that level 5s are supposedly ranked that way because of their relative usefulness to Alistair's plan. Coming to the new characters in this arc, Ruri, as mentioned before, has a design similar to Sailor Moon, so it's nice to see some influence from the classics. In fact, this has been done before in Railgun. Kuriba's design from the Dream Ranker arc was actually inspired by Blackjack. Coming to Ruri, she's supposedly so crazy that even the school teachers can't control her, and this is actually quite surprising since we know Tokyodai can easily keep even their level 5s in check. The next character is Kessai. She's the prime reason for concern in this arc and a pivot point of the narrative as she's Mikoto's mysterious roommate who Kuroko kicked out in the future. Mikoto as a freshman is a standout element in a high-class ladies' school. She isn't interested in cliques, but cliques seem to have a very aggressive recruitment process. It becomes clear that Shokuho and Mikoto are already at the top of their list, and the factions are trying to actively get them to join in order to establish supremacy. A Big Three is introduced. Big Three is a common term used to refer to three important entities in a system, and in relation to the story, the Big Three here refer to the three biggest cliques of Tokyodai. I must say they are doing a good job of showing variety in the cliques. This was severely missing in the story before, as we mostly only saw Shokuho's clique, and any major organization dynamic as such wasn't explored. It's mostly Shokuho in her vigilante mode and her clique offering her support. We'll talk about the Big Three cliques one by one. First, we have the Sha Dunshan's clique, which focuses on volunteer work. This is currently the top dog since she basically holds the most influence. Sha holds the title of Majesty. It seems her effort played a vital role in why Tokyodai is considered a top school. Next, the Mikagami clique. Girls seem to be attracted to her clique because of her oil control ability, and it's one of the most sought out cliques among the students. Being middle school girls, they are in search of the means to increase their bust size. Quite the appeal in terms of recruitment prospects, I must say. And lastly, we have the Hasekura Reiri clique. Possibly the clique that's going to have the biggest role because it seems this clique has the policy of throwing others under the bus to succeed. It's a common prediction that there would be a clique war of sorts soon, and Shokuho will obviously prevail overall because she has the largest clique in the present timeline. And while volunteering and other activities the cliques normally do not give the impression that any serious conflict that could possibly harm people would ever break out, nothing could be more inaccurate as things take a turn for the worse quite soon. The tension and level of competition amongst the cliques was readily apparent even in the previous chapters. And the primary conflict of this arc has been initiated with a fight between the Hasekura and the Mikagami clique. The power struggle has begun. As mentioned before, since the Hasekura clique has a habit of putting others under the bus, this was probably always bound to happen. In OT3, when Toma came to Mikoto's dorm to investigate the clones, Kuroko stated that Mikoto had enemies and alluded to her previous roommate being a traitor. So I want to see how the tensions get set up and the entirety of how the conflict will go down. Will it evolve into something beyond a mere power struggle within the premise of Tokyodai? We'll have to see. Tokyodai has quite a few influential people involved with the institution, be it in the form of rich parents or even board member influence. So it'll be interesting to see if Kamachi will show some bigger impact. In fact, the depiction of a rich girls' school and how the girls would take offense over family status is fairly accurate. I must say I also really like the sort of Esper abilities we are getting to see here. I don't think we got a shapeshifter-like ability among Espers before. It kind of gives me the impression of Hellboy or Hulk or even Beast from Marvel Comics. Although she's probably just adding some material on top, and it probably isn't actually a shapeshifter ability. It must also be noted that no Esper ability really enhances or changes the body of an Esper except for gemstones like Claire or Gunha. The bodies of the Espers never get augmented, and that's one of the major reasons why Toma is incredibly effective in Academy City. The demonic symbolism is also a pretty surprising choice in terms of aesthetics, as it pertains more to the magic side rather than the science side. It looks like Mikoto is also finally getting into the fight, and the level of hostility will soon aggravate further. I must say the conflict escalated like wildfire, and given the nature of the conflict, I'd say it's possible someone is setting them up against each other and pulling strings in the background. The girls are also really quick to attack each other. I think I can see why Biohacker SS mentioned that the reason why Ayu didn't completely lose her composure while being chased by the Gokusai sisters was because she was fairly accustomed to threats because of her Tokyodai schooling. And this chapter showcases that brilliantly. The flashback is doing quite a lot of things in the way of origins, showing us the very first interaction between Mikoto and Misaki and basically giving us an insight into their hostility. Interestingly, this flashback basically also gave us a basic background of Kuroko and her reasoning for entering Tokyodai. We already know from GT4 the influence Kuroko's family has in the financial domain, and it seems her father asked her to get into Tokyodai to build more connections and increase their influence, so that's a nice touch. Mikoto using her railgun, or rather learning to use her railgun, is also showcased here. I've seen some people question as to why exactly is it important to know the origin of her railgun. Well, personally my take on this is, let's not forget that Mikoto is, at this point in the timeline, the weakest level 5. We don't really see her prideful side so much here. It's likely because she knows she's at the last position. According to Railgun's editor, she herself chose her Esper name later in the timeline. So I think it's not too unfounded to say that the Railgun gave her a huge boost in confidence, not to mention actually move her up the ranks. She was barely above a level 4 according to their assessment, but now she's ranked 3rd. So it's safe to say that her coming up with the railgun plays a pretty fundamental role of setting up Mikoto's core psyche that we see in the current timeline, and railgun not being effective is also a huge conflict for Mikoto in New Testament and Genesis Testament. So yes, I think it's important to show why exactly she's so attached to this particular attack of hers, and we see why in this flashback. She came up with it herself, and since she screwed up in her first attempt, we also get the hint that she works towards perfecting it. And this move likely gave her the current psyche and current status she holds. So it's a pretty big deal for her. And as such, I don't think it should be skipped. When we talk about the student organizations that were introduced in this particular arc, I find it quite interesting that a Chinese student is introduced, and she even has a suspicious aura around her. So I'm interested to see where exactly this is headed. In fact, I do think I have quite a few things in the way of expectations from this arc. The arc actually shows a fair bit of diversity in terms of character introductions, and frankly, I'm kind of interested to know how the inner dynamics of the student circle of Tokyodai works and how they function during school activities. As Mikoto said herself, she feels as a delinquent here and doesn't fit in. So I think it will be actually exciting to see how the relationship between her and her former friends will be relevant in the overall conflict. Also, I personally and quite frankly hope the pacing of the story will improve. Right now, the pacing is quite atrocious. In fact, we even got a 6-page chapter at some point. I know the manga industry does exert a lot of pressure on its creators, and I honestly hope Fuyukawa sensei doesn't overwork himself. But at the same time, I do think for a monthly manga, we need more number of pages. And the story needs to move a tad bit faster. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to give a thumbs up if you liked the video and subscribe for future content. Have a nice day.